Okay, good morning to all of you. My name is Edis Bosch. I'm going to be your moderator today for our event, the Citizens Dialogue, with European Commission Vice President Maroš Šefčovič. His primary responsibility, as you know, is Europe's Energy Union. I'm very glad to see that we actually do have an audience, and I take it as a sign that there are actually in Latvia people interested in the Energy Union. I really take it as a sign that you're not just here for the coffee and taking shelter from the cold, even though that's a good opportunity to do that as well. The Vice President has visited with us before, and I suspect if you're from the expert community, the Vice President doesn't need to be introduced, but I will introduce him nevertheless very briefly. I actually did go over your CV before this event. Maroš Šefčovič is a lifelong diplomat, and he began his career in a country that actually no longer exists, Czechoslovakia, not the Austrian Empire, Czechoslovakia, you're not that old. In the Czechoslovakian, and pay attention to this, in the Czechoslovakian Foreign Ministry, Maroš Šefčovič his talents were recognized early on. And in 1991, he was given the very prestigious job of the third secretary and consul in Zimbabwe. But it did go uphill from there. At the time of Slovakia's EU accession in 2004, he was his country's permanent representative in Brussels, and for the last 9 years he has taken various jobs in the European Commission and responsibility for Energy Union since 2014. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have approximately an hour at our disposal. Mr. Šefčovič is going to begin with brief introductory remarks, but then he's all yours for questions and answers, and we really do hope for a lively questions and answers session. I have spoken to many of you before. I've encouraged you to be active and lively. I know many of you do have questions, and I would encourage you to take this opportunity to ask those questions. As always, the Latvian audiences are quite ambivalent about, who's going to go first, or is my question going to sound right, or is my English good and stuff. And so many aspects why our audiences tend to be a little, holding back. But there's no need to do that. We have simultaneous translation as well in case that needs to be used. So questions in English or Latvian or Slovakian are welcome, no problem with that. The primary topic is the Energy Union, but doesn't need to be just that. I mean, the guy is Vice President, so he knows what is going on in Brussels. So any current topics related to European politics are welcome, and climate action as well. I do see representatives from NGOs and institutions responsible for climate targets and emissions and that sort of thing. So those questions are within that portfolio as well, all of them welcome. So we do hope for a lively questions and answers session. A hello to all of you who are following us online, and you can ask questions online as well using the European Commission's hashtag of the representation here in Latvia, hashtag and EU dialogue. So hopefully some questions from the social media will get through to me as well. Having said that, Mr. Šefčovič, the floor is yours for your introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I mean, there was a call for lively discussion after such an introduction. I'm absolutely sure we'll have that. And I also would like to appreciate this jump back into the history of my beginnings. And I have to add one very important element that as a diplomat, you are serving in different countries. I started in Zimbabwe. I was ambassador in Israel, and from both countries I have long-lasting seminars, because in Zimbabwe my second daughter was born, and in Israel my son was born in military hospital, Asaf Harofe, in the middle of all the military operation of that time. So we have a lot of memories from being posted abroad. But as you rightly pointed out, from the moment when my country was getting closer and closer to the European Union, I was involved in the EU affairs without, at that time, having a slightest idea that I would appear here in Latvia, in Riga, as a Commission's Vice President. But this is what sometimes happens when you are working on such a dynamic topic. Very often I'm getting the question,
would you like to take the
Yeah,
seat?
sit, okay.
I think it would be more convenient.
That very often you are getting the question that what is the energy union all about? And I'm explaining it in a way that at first we had to make sure that we would have enough energy in the European Union, because I think your country understands it very well, definitely mine. We still have very vivid memories of the 2009 when the supplies of gas been interrupted, and we've been faced with very stark choices what to do, where the last remnants of the energy should be channeled. And in our case, it was the hospitals and households. So the whole industry was on hold, and it was quite clear that we cannot allow this ever happen again, and that we need to make sure that we have enough energy in Europe. So once we secure that with our legislative proposals, with our diversification, with our pressure for transparency of intergovernmental agreements and commercial contracts, then we moved to the climate agenda, to the Paris Agreement-related agenda, to make sure that this energy would be cleaner and cleaner. And therefore, the second set of proposals was very much linked with how to reform emission trading scheme, how we would reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from so-called non-ETS sectors, like transport, like building stock, where we want to increase energy efficiency, and I hope that this bank will help us to do that, or what to do in agriculture to make it more sustainable for the future. And once we have enough energy, and energy which is clean, we want to use it to power clean mobility, to decarbonize the industry, and to really pave the way for this energizing and modernizing effect which this transition to the low carbon future brings with itself. And here I'm very confident that Europe, as a first mover, will really benefit from the technological investment, because next decade will be very decisive in this global competition about the major economies, who will be able to make this transition more successfully, whose technologies would dominate in this field, and how this new global competition between biggest economies, American, Chinese, and so far the biggest one, the Europeans, would evolve in the future. So therefore, the energy union is extremely important, not only from the point of view of cables, interconnection, but for getting our basis, our industry, our society ready for this huge transformation which is taking place because of need to fight climate change and because of these new digital transformational technologies which are making it to the forefront. Where we are with the energy union, I'm glad to say that this definitely would be one of the 10 Jean-Claude Juncker's priority, which would be fulfilled to the dot. We are now in the final phases of negotiating the last legislative proposals. Only one thing is missing, which we'll present in May of this year, and it would be the new proposal for emission standards for heavy-duty vehicles, for trucks, and such a first chartering of the way for the future for connected and automated driving. Then the homework very much moves to the member states, because we would like them to start their work on the national energy and climate plans already now, because it's not enough to have only the global umbrella like Paris Agreement. It's not enough to have the new European legal framework, which we presented through different legislative proposals being adopted over the last 3 years. But it's very important to have in each member state the vision, where you see your country, where you see Latvia in 2030, from the point of view of energy mix, from the point of view of being linked to your neighbors and to the European markets. What do you want to do with energy efficiency in your buildings? How you want to transform your mobility? How many electric cars do you want to have? And how are you going to support your excellent young researchers at your university? So you would also develop the talent in your research community, and that talented people would stay in Europe and not always go and complete their research work in Silicon Valley or somewhere else in the United States. And I understand that this homework is not the easy one, but it has to be done, because if you have here the experts from the energy sector, they will be first to tell you that if you decide to build the power plant, you build it now and it stays with you at least 40, 50 years. So the decisions which we are taking now, clearly the consequences will be still felt by the generation of our children in 2050, 2060. So therefore, we need to have that comprehensive thinking, how we want to transform our national systems, how they should fit well with the neighbors in the region, and how all that European energy landscape would evolve. And if you allow me to conclude on few remarks on Latvia. I'm always very happy when I come back to the Baltic countries, because I know that national perspective and perspective of your friend coming from abroad is sometimes different. It's definitely the same in my country. But if you are coming, you know, after a while you see the progress of that country better than when you are living in it. And I remember when we started with the Energy Union that you very much felt that you are something like energy island, that you are not properly interconnected with the European main energy networks, that you are very vulnerable from the point of view of energy security, and you wanted Europe to focus on this issue, and you did a lot yourself. And the result is quite remarkable, because I remember when we've been first time measuring the electricity interconnection of Latvia and Baltic countries with Europe, so it was somewhere on the level of 4%. And our goal for 2020 is 10%. For 2030 is 15%. But you already achieved this jump from 4 to 23% of interconnection rate, which is really remarkable, and it completely transformed your electricity situation. The fact that you are on the North Pole, in fact that you are getting linked with what I consider the most progressive and best working electricity market, and that's a Nordic one, I think it's just really investment into the competitivity of your country and of the Baltic region. And I can say the same about gas interconnectors. All that projects which we are working on together, Estonia, Finland, GIPL between Lithuania and Poland, all that interconnectors between Baltic countries, and the plans you have for better use of your gas underground storage in Čukavce. All this, I think it's very important, because together with this Klaipėda LNG terminal, again, it creates a new reality of the gas supply. You have the access to the global LNG market. You have now the interconnectors with the reverse possibilities, which can get the gas from different sources. So you saw it on the drop of the price from the traditional main supplier, but at the same time you see that now you have options, you have more competition, and that I think it's very important. It's very important for the future. So the last thing I would mention is that we need to complete this reunification of the Baltic energy systems with the European ones, and we have to complete the synchronization of your electricity networks with the Central European network. I had the chance to discuss it yesterday with the Prime Minister, and I told him that we would do our utmost from the side of the Commission to facilitate the process in a way that I hope by June we will have a decision of the 3 Baltic countries and Poland. What is the option you prefer? How you want to proceed, and on which option we should focus our attention. Why I'm highlighting the June date so much? Because we know how the system within the Commission works. If we would have a good consensual decision supported by all four countries and the European Commission by June, then we could proceed with preparation of the necessary project and necessary proposals for financial support to be asked from the Connecting Europe facility. And we know that the synchronization would not be a cheap exercise, but I think it's strategically important and we have to do it. And you have now very strong fan club, if I can use it in that way, in the European Commission. President of the Commission is extremely interested in this project. He's asking about it all the time. My colleague, Commissioner Arias Cañete, myself, all the teams at the DG Energy would like to complete this process and really help you to get to the phase before we start the election process in the European Union, and to arrive at the moment where we can say, here we have a decision, here is the project, and here is the financing for applying this synchronization process. And I think that would be something which would clearly be such a last piece of the puzzle of building all the necessary bridges and links between Latvia, Baltic states, and the main European networks. And that's my plea, which I brought to Latvia and which we are sharing with your Baltic friends. So let's use the time, let's arrive at the decision by June, because that would allow us really to complete the mission and make sure that when the next European Parliament and the next Commission will be in place, they will be already executing what was agreed now. So I think that I had rather long introductory remarks, so I would stop here because I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions from the audience.
Not that sure. Do we have?
You sound very pessimistic.
Yeah. Okay. Very. Well, thank you very much for this very comprehensive overview. I'm really intrigued to see whether my job of trying to encourage sort of asking questions behind the scenes can actually pay off right now, because otherwise I'm stuck. I'm not an expert on energy union. I did read something on EU Observer, and so the pretty trustworthy publication, wouldn't you think? And they sort of criticized you this week for claiming success of the Energy Union project, and you also said you think the project is going to be filled to the dot during the Juncker Commission at the end of it. But so they here make the argument that that is only a theoretical success, not actually a real one yet. Do you have a quick answer to that?
I really would like to ask the questions, because you'll find more critical articles about me. But no, of course. I mean, that's the job of the journalist, to put us under the critical spotlight and to really be very inquisitive about what we do. But I'm being serious. I'm absolutely 100% convinced that what we do is a real transformation of the European energy landscape. And when I started, I can tell you, there was a lot of skepticism if what we are trying to do is realistic at all. For example, when I said that we would like to have a new system where all intergovernmental agreements for the sector of gas would be checked by the European Commission if they're compatible with the EU law. I mean, there was a lot of experts who've been laughing at me. That would never happen. This is backroom deals. We will never show it to you. Now it's done, it's in there. I mean, and the rule applies. Then, of course, there was a second proposal, and how about these very important commercial contracts? That if you import more than 40% of the consumption of gas from one supplier, that we want to have a right to push the company, these commercial contracts, and all the caveats and articles would be shown to the regulator and necessary to the European Commission. Again, it would never happen. That goes against the tradition in this business, and now it's there. I mean, it's a law, so it's happening. The same discussion was about the security of supply directive, where for the first time I think in the history of the Union, we are really putting into the full practice the solidarity clause from Lisbon Treaty in the gas sector, meaning that if there is some interruption of supply, or if your neighbor is in trouble, because it could be political, it could be technical, it could be a natural disaster. So now we have a clear obligation, and it's very precisely specified how this would happen, that the neighbors must help their neighbors in a need and supply the gas to so-called protected customers. Again, the discussion was very difficult, but it's happening. And of course, if we look at the climate agenda, so all these new proposals for emission trading scheme, for this reduction of the greenhouse gas emission from transport, agriculture, and the building stock, it's already adopted. So it will be applicable as of 2020. And again, we are the first major economy on this planet. We just took the Paris Agreement and literally transformed it into the law. I mean, let's see which other economy would follow us. And we are clearly demonstrating the global leadership here. And the last thing, and that was actually probably the most intense part of the discussion this morning in the Parliament, because we started to discuss electric cars. I'm pretty sure that with that proposal which we put on the table, we would really have at least each third car on the European highways by 2030, which would be or electric or hydrogen or hybrid. So these are the things which are really happening, which be not thought of possible 3 years ago, and they are taking place. Of course, for the people and for the journalistic community, I think they want to see tangible results now. I mean, some of them will be transformative. All these new systems will kick in 2020. But if you talk to the energy operators, I'm sure that they will tell you that they have to change their business model already now because of the new competition, new style, and with this new electricity market design which you are putting on the table, it would be even faster. A lot will be happening in the energy efficiency field, because I think already here in Latvia, as far, if I remember correct number, 14,000 households benefited from this energy efficiency renovation scheme, and the people are living, I'm sure, in better apartments and pay less for the energies. And we would like to enhance it, maximize it, and we would like also to use the cooperation of Altum Bank. And yesterday with the Prime Minister and Finance Minister, we discussed how important it would be to set up the new investment platform, so the more money from different financial sources from the EU can come and be channeled into this renovation, energy efficiency project in Latvia, because these are the projects which people feel. Yeah, I'm living in a better apartment, in cleaner environment, and I pay less for the energy. So I understand that this would be the most tangible result, but these results in combination with all the transformative changes which will follow, I believe, will convince also EU observers that the changes are real.
Okay, good. We had some hands raised. Yes, please. Can we, yes, microphone is arriving over there.
My microphone, I think I could do without, but thank you. Ojārs Kehris, Economist Association. I'm many times in your position, Eddie, and it's why I try, but as well as I think that maybe you're looking more for technical or practical questions. But I as well stick with, I'm not a journalist, I'm an economist, but I'm stick with a philosophical question. It's about the union, because union linguistically is a very flexible word. And we have very strong unions sometimes, and sometimes quite weak. For example, I think that what is the strong, if you have a family, children, common household, and maybe live together with your older parents, I call it very strong union that is maybe nearly 99 or 90% union. And then we have, for example, with friends from different countries, I call as well the union, but we have a lunch or dinner once a year together, and that's it. And this is maybe union by 2%. Our European Union, energy union. What percentage union it is maybe when you receive it, I mean this Commission, and in what percentage you will leave it in 1.5 year. Because right now, of course, you mentioned already the things that we don't have a common electricity grid. Of course, we know why it and what is the history as well. We're buying energy with the different prices, and not only because different is transportation costs. I think it's quite far from no really strong union, but of course maybe it's impossible to have 100% union as well. We maybe, at least many said that we starting the projects in some countries that other countries are absolutely against and so. And maybe, yes, what is one or two major things that you think could be done in I think in 1.5 years left by this Commission? What would be done in energy sector that we have, I think the goal is to have the stronger union. Thank you for it's
Thank
quite
you very
long.
much. If I could also add just one thing to what's just that, a precise case that is often being discussed in this part of Europe about Nord Stream 2 and that project and how it feeds into this whole idea that we're in solidarity sort of with one another and taking into account interests of all of Europe, not just our separate countries.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I mean, I think you described it very, very precisely, and you highlighted the paradoxical nature of the fact that the EU was first constructed as a coal and steel community. So there was some kind of natural expectations that this would be the areas upon which you would focus. And we built the single market for people, for goods, for services, for capital, and we still do not have the single market for the energies. And that was, I believe, the reason for many problems we had with energy security, many problems which led to the fragmented nature of the European energy markets, and also it makes us much more vulnerable to the exporters, and also it was much easier to play us against each other because everybody was looking for some kind of advantage only for me. And one reason for that was, and it was also in my job, one of the biggest challenge, how to combine this European approach with the fact that in all our treaties you have very clear clause that if it comes to the energy mix, meaning how we want to produce your energy, it's the matter decided by the sovereign member state. So that's their decision, if what they want to do. So we had to find a different way. We had to go for that positive, stimulating approach, showing the advantages what the common approach would bring. And we had to fix what I call the hardware and the software. Hardware, this is what we've been discussing, all this interconnection in the field of electricity, all these gas interconnectors, all these LNG terminals, underground storage, that we actually would have the hardware which would allow us to send the energies across the European Union. The market, which was, because of the long-term policies, fragmented, could be united, and could be united because there is a technical preconditions which are there to make it possible. Second thing, which is very often even more difficult, we needed to bring a new software to the energy union, meaning new rules, new approach of regulators. The most difficult, I think, is the mental shift of the energy ministers, that they, of course, have to think about the lights being on in their own countries, but at the same time that they have to look for the solutions not only in their courtyard, not only in their garden, but they have to look for the cheaper and better and more reliable and more secure synergies from the region and from the European level. And that's something what is a challenge. And very often you see the usual game, we come with ambitious proposals, then you have member states who are very, very cautious and very often like to change as little as possible. Then you have super ambitious parliament, and then we usually end up somewhere around what the European Commission proposed in the end of the trilogue. So it's a very complex exercise, but I have to say that I very much admire that foresight of the European leaders from 2014, which was actually decisive for putting this file finally on the European table. That first we need to combine much better our competitiveness agenda with our climate agenda. Second, that we really faced with all that new reality, which you understand here very well, new resurgent Russia, that we need to have much stronger energy security, and we have to be feeling much more secure by having possibilities to get the energy from different corners of this planet. So this is how big the task was and what was the difficult starting lineup. So where we are, I would say that we are completing the hardware. We will complete the new software by the end of this mandate, and then we will start the application even before the end of this decade. So this will be done on the EU level. What we would need is dedication, proper implementation, and also I would say this homework and a vision on the level of the member states, how they want to play within these new rules, how ambitious they want to be, how they would embrace all these new possibilities which are for them. So I don't know, it's very difficult to put it in percentages. I would say that when we started with the zeros, I would put it at 60–70%, so it's still the last mile, last 30% are usually the most difficult ones. But this last mile, we have to do, that has to be done more on the level of the EU member states, because I'm telling it to my partners in the member states that we cannot build that energy union in Brussels, that we have to build it in Latvia, in Lithuania, in Estonia, in Slovakia. We have to convince the stakeholders, energy operators and the public that this is actually important for the European economy and European future. So that would be my answer, that I think we created new platform, but now the platform must be used.
Give us the percentage.
I said between 60–70%.
60–70.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
so okay, good. I was following our questions on the social media. Didn't catch that. So 60–70. Let's write it down. Okay, I see hands over there and over there. Please. Okay.
Yes, and here I was worried I clearly hadn't chosen the best seat to be seen. Hello, Mr. Šefčovič. I have two questions. First, regarding the gas market liberalization in Latvia. According to Latvian energy law, the shareholders of the gas transmission and storage operator Connexus Baltic Grid had to leave the company by the end of last year. Gazprom has not done that. So I was wondering if the Commission maybe sees it also as a breach of the European legislation, respectively the third energy packet. And second question would be maybe a little out of your direct expertise, but regarding the railway project Rail Baltica. Yesterday, the shareholders of the joint venture RB Rail moved to have a vote of no confidence for the CEO, Baiba Rubesa. It was not a joint decision. Lithuania and Estonia were for it, and Latvia was against it. And some NGOs have already raised concerns that maybe political motivations are prevailing over good governance. So maybe you could shed some light on how the Commission views this. Are you aware of this particular issue, and how closely are you monitoring the project? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean the both are really very up to date questions. So I can give you such off the cuff answers, and therefore take it with a certain precaution and caveats, because I'm also a lawyer, and I know that if you are talking about the shareholding agreement, you are talking about the opinion of the regulator. So you better be precise. So I can answer to you in the form of principles, and in the case of Rail Baltica, the impressions we have. If it comes to the Connexus, I understand that the Latvian government very much wants to have the company and the underground storage under control. So there was a decision about the repurchasing to repurchase the shares, and I understand that this discussion on this is ongoing. At the same time, as far as I know, if it comes to the management board, so the management board now consists of representative of Latvian government and Fond Margarita, if I'm not mistaken, and the Gazprom, who is I think minority shareholder, if my memory doesn't elude me, it's around 1/3 of the shares, and the company is there in a position of a minority shareholder who can benefit from the dividends. So if you look at it in this schematic way, but of course, I mean, we would have to wait at first for the opinion of the regulators. The unbundling under these circumstances is possible, but of course there is a lot of details which have to be studied, and therefore we clearly here would have to follow the procedure, which is as follows. First, it lays on the table of the regulator, who has to issue the opinion. Then the regulator sends it to us, so we study it from the, I would say, wider perspective, and the European law says that after we issue our opinion on this, national regulators should take the utmost or pay utmost attention to our opinion before the opinion is made final. So I think we have really to go through these 3 phases of the process. As I said, from what I know, based on this principal information I have, unbundling would be fine, would be possible, but let's go through the due process, because lawyers are the lawyers, details are the details, and we need to be 100% sure that we do the correct thing. Concerning the Rail Baltica, I think here, again, when we are talking about the big things, Rail Baltica is a big thing. Because this is, I mean, when we are talking about reconnecting Baltic countries with the rest of the European Union, I mean, the same what we do in electricity interconnection, what we do with the gas interconnectors, the same we need to do in transport networks, and clearly Rail Baltica in this case is a flagship project. And I know that it's a project of enormous magnitude, a lot of costs, and of course you have to coordinate 3 countries, and you have to decide how it would be linked with Europe. So I can imagine that it's not easy to manage, that you might have a lot of, I mean, business tensions, political tensions, but as far as I know, the CEO, Baiba Rubasa, has very good reputation. That she was known for the transparency, she was known for push for the good governance. So I don't know what has happened in the shareholder meeting of yesterday, and of course I hope that in the good traditions of the Baltic countries working very closely together, that this also would be solved, because that's a project which is important for Baltic countries, but I can assure you that it's very important from the European point of view. I mean, it's a very important piece of infrastructure. I think it's more than 240 million euros, which came from the European budget to support this project. I know that if the proper governance, management, and if the project is executed on time, even more money could come for support of these projects. So we need to have a good traction on the ground. We need to have transparency, good governance, and clear, accomplished stages of build-up of this railway, because it's a project which is here to really, again, transform the nature, how the goods are transported between the Baltic countries and Europe. So I hope that the good solution will be found.
All right, thank you for this quick reaction on topicalities. I saw a hand somewhere over there, please. Yes, in that corner.
Hello, Mr. Vice President, thank you for your words. You talked a lot about interconnection and infrastructure between countries. Now, the concept of the European Energy Highway, I think we can agree is well underway. Infrastructure already exists. The projects are going forward. So that's not really going to be a challenge for tomorrow. From my perspective, the challenge of tomorrow, because of the new means of energy productions, a lot of renewable energy infrastructure are becoming more local, more regional. You have municipal means of energy production. And so the issue of tomorrow, in order to harmonize energy and demand across that European energy highway, is going to be smart grids. You already talked a little bit about the rapport between the European Commission and member states, but as the European Commission and the Energy Commission, what are today your tools that are at your disposal to enforce the development and implementation of smart grid concepts at the level of national member states? Is it more legislative tool? Do you have a financial tool? Where do you go forward from there?
Okay, before you answer, I'll just note that I do see a lot of hands now being raised. So the questions and the answers are going to have to become shorter. So sure.
I'll do my best. If it comes to the smart grids, you're absolutely right. We need to invest in this new technology to match the increased presence of renewables in our energy mix. And despite the fact that renewables got a little bit of a bad name in new member states because sometimes overshot subsidy schemes, now we see that the cost of solar and wind dramatically falls down. I mean, you can get now the solar kilowatt hour for 2 cents. You can get offshore wind kilowatt hour for 5, 6 cents, and no subsidies required. That's the reality of the projects which are all being auctioned or being even put in practice already. And as I said, in 2030 we expect that 70% of electricity in our grid would come from renewables. We will have more and more renewables in district heating. So, and we need to find the best response to that intermittency of these renewables. So one is energy storage, how to store the energy, batteries, power to gas, different kind of solutions. And second, of course, is the smart grids. And here we are still under the development what the smart grid is, because it could mean different things and it could be done in different ways. And Finnish Prime Minister, who made, I would say, a big success in telecommunication, asked me, shouldn't we harmonize? I'll set some standards for the smart grids as we did for the mobile telephony, because it helps us to be so fast and to be so successful in this sector. And always when I see research community, I always ask this question. And I get 2 sets of answers, but if I have to somehow summarize, it would be probably too early to do that, because this is still technology which is very much evolving. So what the smart grid for me is at this stage is the digitized grid, which can read the information from the smart meters, from the households, from the companies, which can react to the demand-side management request, let's say from the big companies which want to save on electricity, and which can really use that intelligence within to optimize the flows of the electricity in that grid. And of course, we have to support it, because that's the future. If we want to have millions of electric cars on our roads, when we want to have more renewables in our systems, our grids have to be digitized, they have to be smart, and that's what we have to do. Therefore, what we can do. Therefore, we are pushing for this wide rollout of the smart meters, and I understand that Latvia is going in that direction as well. And the second thing is we are also supporting, I would say, these new technologies financially, and I was very glad that on the last list of projects of the common interest, for the first time we had, I would say, balance between how many projects do we support in gas sector, how many projects do we support in the electricity sector. So it seems that we are leveling up this lack of infrastructure. We are progressing on this hardware build-up. But for the first time, if I remember correctly, we have like 6 or 7 projects from the realm of the smart grids. So we've been supporting this smart grids development on this cross-border basis. And you see that this is a thing which is more and more developed by the big companies, but also where the researchers and innovations are focusing their attention more and more. And that would be, I would say, the best answer I can give you. Market will push for it, and we are ready to support it as a new market tool, but also as a research and innovation project of the smart grids of the next generations.
Okay, thank you very much. Over there. Yes, please. Yeah. If we can deliver the microphone over there, please. Yes, here in the middle. Can you throw the microphone? Yes, it's being delivered. Yes. So, quick questions and answers so that we can cover the field as wide as possible. Please.
Selena Green, Liberty and Banquet. I wanted to ask you about energy poverty. And first of all, thank you for raising this topic in all around Europe. Actually, I heard recently in your speech that you are actually not only speaking about energy poverty, but also visiting the sites and meeting the people who are living in the conditions. So I wonder, do you plan also to visit Riga and to see our multi-dwelling houses, how really bad, inefficient they are? And actually, yeah, that's a huge problem in Latvia in terms of energy efficiency. And if we can tackle energy poverty, of course, that's energy efficiency. And second question is about climate ambitions. So I will try to keep it very short. Can we have 40% of climate actions for next multi-annual finance framework?
You mean like a mainstreaming of the budget, yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean the allocation for the climate
Yeah.
activities in order to boost transition to clean energy, and especially for all, so that we can also use energy efficiency for low-income households, so they can also ensure the energy efficiency by using EU funds.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just add a bit of statistics that actually only 5% of the old Soviet-era apartment buildings have been insulated in order to make them more energy sufficient. Though, well, there's a lot to do in that. So,
yeah. No, thank you very much for that for that question, because I think when we are talking about this energy transformation, we never should forget about the social impact of the transformation and social consequences for the people who, if not taken care properly, might be left behind. Therefore, I started this call regions in the transition initiative, where we can learn how some regions did the transformation and how can we bring that experience to the regions we go through the same process. But going back to the energy poverty, right? Despite the fact that, unfortunately, in the European Union, we do not have a common definition what energy poverty really is, we decided to use the three major criteria. Are you able to pay for your bill? Can you heat or cool your apartment or the house properly? Do you live in the apartment which is otherwise unlivable because the roof is leaking or the walls are so damp that it's really hazardous for your health? And if you take these three criteria together, so we have in Europe 50 million people who suffer from at least one of these problems. To get to the bottom of the thing and have precise data for better decision making for the future, on Monday we launched so-called Energy Poverty Observatory, which will be collecting the evidence, and hopefully we will derive in a little bit more united definition what energy poverty really is and how to tackle it. There are several things which we put in our legislation, like making sure that if you are faced with the risk of being disconnected from the grid because you are not paying the bill, that it just doesn't happen like this, and in the middle of the winter. There should be some kind of process where you are warned, where some options are offered to you, that when we would really treat you as a human being and not just leave you in the cold and dark in the middle of the winter. That's in the legislative proposals we've been discussing earlier on. But I see as a best medicine for tackling the energy poverty really the energy efficiency. Because, as you said, I visited several sites where this project been completed, and you can see that how the life is changed if you pay less for the energy bills and if you live in better, more isolated, renovated apartments of houses. The question is where to get the money for it. And here, I think that what we need to learn, especially in the new member states, is to work more with innovative financing. We have to learn how to blend, meaning mixed structural funds with the private sector funds, how to use the local banks with the knowledge of the local environment, and use the risking facilities like the Juncker Investment Fund for actually having this financial volume, which we can then channel to the cities for the renovations of the apartments or communal buildings like hospital theaters and schools. We started with it already under this commission, and I have to say that the biggest project so far been done in France, in Denmark, because there the financial establishment is more used for this innovative financing than it is in our countries. There are bigger countries, so it's easier to aggregate the volume which is necessary for the EIB to start the process, which is 20 million of euros. And we had also to clarify the situation, how the investment in energy efficiency would affect your public deficit. Because Minister of Finance been very reluctant to, let's say, give some kind of free hand to the mayors to go for such a loans or such a financing, because they've been afraid that it would affect the public deficit. So we adopted this new approach, which is called energy performance contracts. And if you do it under these rules, this is not counted into your public deficit. So Valdis Dombrovski will not come and will not tell you, no, I mean, you are exceeding your public deficit, you have to be more careful. So I hope that also, because I understand that Altum Bank is also not only the host of the meeting, but it's one of the bank which should be, what I hope will be the investment platform in Latvia. Because I think in all our member states we need to have investment platform where you can aggregate the projects, where you can look for the financing from the local banks, and where you create this interlocutor for the EIB to bring more money into the sector, so you can really renovate the schools, apartments, and work on these energy performance contracts, where you lower the bill, and at the same time you split the savings between the investors and the people who are using the building, living in, or using it for communal purposes. So it's a huge opportunity. The last thing I would say, because it will be announced, I think, in the next couple of days, until 2020, we want, under this smart finance for smart buildings, to channel 10 billion euros for this type of the project, to start up such a, I hope, renovation wave across the Europe. But there is a lot of interest from financial circles to go in this project, because it's not a rocket science. You know how much you pay now, you know how much you can save, and you know when your money will be back in the form of revenue. We just need to set up the mechanism that this would really start working. And effect on our energy consumption would be huge, because at average in Europe, I believe in our countries it's probably more than 40% of the energy we consume goes for heating and cooling. So that's an enormous amount of energy which is used in the buildings.
Okay, I think our hosts, Altum, are going to be happy that you refer to them as a bank, because I don't think they technically qualify as a bank, but that's just an aside.
It's a lack of local knowledge.
Yeah. Okay, but I would come back to the point raised earlier about the emissions targets, and because if you talk to, for example, I'll just amplify that question, but I think it is important to tackle it. If you talk to utility operators and you know, producers of, you know, traditional producers of energy, they remain unconvinced that all of those climate targets, Paris Charter, emissions targets, that they will not decrease the competitiveness and the business models. And if you talk to the average, I don't know, Latvian person and discuss with him what he sees on his electricity bill, he said, you know, I don't like that part which, you know, is highlighted as coming from renewables and sources like that. I think it does increase my bill rather than decreasing, right? So I think it is a tough part of your job to persuade actually people that it does make sense, and it does not deprive, does not decrease competitiveness, and actually drives the prices down rather than up.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is a very intense discussion. But at the same time, I would ask, can we put the price tag on floods in Central Europe? Can we put the price tag on hurricanes in Florida? Can we put the price tag of these 400,000 people who are dying in Europe every year because of air pollution? How can we quantify that? How can we quantify that? And we know that the situation will be just worse and worse, because we see how this weather is changing every year. And I have to say that what we see these sudden changes of the weather, which usually brings the natural disasters. We created something like an alliance of weather forecasters. And I asked him, so how you are talking about the weather every day. How do you perceive it? So, I mean, empirical evidence, these anchors who are speaking on CNN and elsewhere about the weather, they tell you that over the last 10 years, the news on the weather-related disasters increased fourfold in the last 10 years. So 4 times more disasters we have than we had 10 years ago. So this is coming, and we have to do something about it. And of course, coming back to the bill that people are paying, I think when we started with renewables in Europe, we've been first to do that in such a massive scale. And there was again that cautious approach at that time from the member state. You know, let's do it on a country-by-country basis. We know our situation the best. We want to have a special scheme for my country because I know my system, and we want to do it on our own. So the result was that we had different schemes, we had different supports. Sometimes the support was overshot, was too generous, and then we had a crisis. And what happened was that in some countries they went for these sudden retroactive changes, and it brought these countries to the legal problems, and the investors been very shaken. Should we really go and invest? And then again, government will change its mind, and we will lose our investment. So I think that it was very important to learn from that experience. So what we are proposing right now, and that's the new electricity market design, which I was describing half an hour ago, there we already see that renewables are now fully competitive with the traditional sources of energy. So what we want to do is to phase out subsidies, we want to restore market principles, and we want the renewables to compete with our sources of energy. And knowing how the costs of the power generation from renewables are falling down, I'm sure that they will be pretty competitive. And I think that the best persuasion for the consumers would be when they will see no more subsidies for renewables in their bill, and they would realize that they breathe cleaner air, and that actually many of them would be happy when they would see that big part of the energy they use is actually sustainable, it's clean, and it's renewable.
All right. I'll tell you what, we have approximately 10 minutes remaining. So what I will do is I'll gather remarks and questions in a bunch and then present it to the commissioner. He can react to that and then with his final remarks as well. So please, over here. Yes.
Ines Vaidere. I am member of, as you defined recently, of super ambitious European Parliament. I work in Budget Committee and Committee for Internal Market, and I slightly disagree with you when you said single market is almost completed. It's not. It's absolutely not. Digital single market is far from completion, and energy market as well. And I slightly disagree with you also when you tell about who start from zero in energy union. I remember 2004 when I started to work in European Parliament, Commissioner Oettinger started really from zero. And what I appreciate, he sometimes was very sharp with his particular country, Germany, who is always for its particular interest. And I wish really to increase this percentage. What about Mr. Kehris spoke initially? My questions are two. One of the question is about Nord Stream 2. You didn't tell us about this, you didn't touch it even, but it's very important for us because Baltic states objected, Poland objected, our strategical partner Ukraine objected. This is a great problem. And European Commission a few months ago gave us a hope that probably something would be done in this direction. But in these days we heard that Germany already issued permissions to start the works, etc., and Germany is against this project. What is really the situation right now? And this project is just flying now and you can do nothing, we can do nothing with this absolutely political project because Nord Stream is not functioning in full capacity. Right. This is the first question. And second question is about investment in in my eyes, solar energy is one of the most progressive sources of energy. And we hear all the time, China, China, China. But we don't hear investment in this direction in European Union. What you could tell about these two questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Additional ones, please.
Andris Goviņš, European Movement in Latvia. And actually it's European Movement in Latvia, which is an organization which you most probably know already. I was asking, I have two questions. First is the same about Nord Stream. My impression is that the Commission is passive or reactive. As we see also in this discussion, you didn't touch the topic from your side. We have to ask, so would there be a possibility that you become more active in these issues? Because so far we see that there is a strong undermination risk for all those great goals which you stress, and action is not as intense as we would wish. I think a lot of people would wish. And the second one is you talked about green infrastructure, CO2 emissions. There is a strongly debated and criticized project plan in Latvia of building a tram from EU funds, extremely expensive and with almost no analysis in alternative possibilities to have a bigger effect on CO2 emissions, which is the main goal stated from the tram builders and from the EU program. Why isn't there bigger control from EU side? Because I think it's lacking completely, at least in this situation, and we are spending 100 million euros without a proper CO2 emission analysis for alternatives which definitely exist and which a lot of experts say would be much, much more efficient.
All right, thank you very much for that. I saw an additional hand over there. Okay, yes, please.
Hello, I'm a student, and I will have a more local question maybe, and it will concern alternative fuels on transportation. As we know, there are several of them, like electricity, hydrogen, biomethane, and natural gas. And in Latvia, we have the situation when a strong our government supports mostly the electrical vehicles by giving them subsidies, by these tax advantages, the possibility to use public transportation lines and others, free parking and in some cases even free charging. But in the same time, natural gas is cheap, also clean, and widely accessible. So in your opinion, do you think that Latvian government should put more attention on it too and should treat both alternative fuels in the same way by developing natural gas infrastructure and
for vehicles?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, a bunch of questions to finish us off. Nord Stream, you're not going to have an opportunity to bypass that,
no,
I'm afraid.
That was not my intention. No, because I think we have a, I would say, really very rich story to tell. But why I didn't open with the Nord Stream? Because of course it's one very controversial pipeline, very polarizing project. But it's one project of many projects which we do, and I wouldn't like to have like 1 hour discussion on this one project. You would overshadow all other topics, I think, which we covered, which are also, I think, very important for your country and for Europe. But I very gladly answer the question on the Nord Stream. And I think I had to do the same at many occasions to all the journalists who have been asking me the questions over the last 2 days. The fact is that this project started already in a very politicized manner, because from one side the Russian company announced that they want to build that project, and in the second sentence they said that once this is built, the transit through Ukraine will be closed. And of course it made the project immediately very political. And you know very well the statements which are coming from the promoters of this project, that this project is commercial. And when we talk to them and when we have these exchanges also in the media, I usually add that I've never seen a commercial project which is so hotly politically debated on the highest level of the European Union. And we had hardly the summit of our leaders, heads of state and government last year, when this project was not debated. And it's very clearly polarizing the European Union. Clearly, it doesn't go in line with our strategic goal of diversification of our sources. And of course, if it's built, that is what, as it was proposed initially, it would clearly undermine the situation in Ukraine and make the situation in Central and Eastern European worse. All this we all know. The question is what we can do about it. And of course, we as a European Commission, we have to operate within the legal framework which we have at our disposal. And from the moment one, and I think we had quite a few debates on this in the European Parliament as well, we've been saying very clearly that we would make sure that this pipeline, if built, would be built in 100% full respect of the European laws. What happens in that? We had a big legal discussions among what I would simplify it and put it as two schools of legal thought in the EU, how the third energy package is applicable to the offshore pipelines. And you had a different school of thoughts. You saw the exchanges between the legal services and probably also attended some of the discussions we had in the European Parliament on this issue. Despite of that, nobody could dispute that here we are talking about the collision of the legal norms. Russian law, then law of the high seas, and then economic zone, territorial water, and what I believe is very clear that the EU law should be applicable on the territory and also in the offshore part of the seas which are under the European jurisdiction. But there have been also competing legal opinions, and therefore we decided that the best way to proceed would be two things to do. The first one would be to start the negotiations between the European Union and Russia on how to solve the legal issues, parameters, etc., related to this project, and at the same time how to make sure that the transit through Ukraine would continue in a commercially viable way, and that Central and Eastern Europe would not again be the region which would suffer from the buildup of this pipeline. We put it to the Council. The discussion in the Council, it's again not easy one. I would say when I was presenting first time this proposal to the ministers, so I got the support from more than half of them, but then also there was a stiff opposition from some others. And then, of course, the ambassador's been working on it, experts been working on it, and then we came to another hurdle, and it was the questioning of the fact if the third energy package, the gas law, is really applicable for this offshore pipeline. So then I said, okay, if this is the problem, let's clarify it. Let's make it absolutely sure that the law applies. So we proposed amendment to the gas law, where it's clearly stated that the third energy package applies to economic zone and territorial water. So now we have it in the European Parliament, the amendment. And you know how the discussion is going on there, and I believe that you will be able to approve that amendment very quickly, and we got the assurances from the Bulgarian presidency that they will try to speed up the work in the Council and that we can get that amendment, because I think now it's quite clear that it's preconditioned for the mandate, so we can negotiate with Russia. So that's the situation where you have to operate with the tools you have, and where you have the project which is very controversial and politically very, very sensitive. But just to conclude with Ukraine, I had a meeting with the Russian energy minister in Davos last week. And we discussed it again and again and again, and I told him how important the continuation of the transit through Ukraine is for the European Union. And we all know that what we expect right now is the result of the Stockholm arbitration. I expect that it finally, the ruling would be issued in the middle of this month. And then I suggested that we should sit trilaterally Ukraine, Russia, and the European Commission, and to discuss what are the consequences of the arbitration ruling, and what can we do to make sure that the transit in post-2019 period would continue. So we will see how it will go in that direction. So I understand your frustration, and I understand the impression which is being made, but I can tell you that we spend enormous amount of time and political energy on managing the situation, which is very, very, very complex one. And on
I'm afraid we just have the time for tackle one, alternative fuels in transportation or solar.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that's quite specific.
To be quite honest, it's very specific, and I do not pretend that I know all the details of the Latvian file with such a precision that I could comment on the tram. But on solar energy and alternative fuels, if it comes to the solar energy, I really think that we are superpower. The fact is that the solar panels we are importing from China. That was a strategic mistake, which happened, and therefore I want to avoid the same strategy mistake to be done with the batteries. Therefore I started this Airbus for batteries type of project, this alliance, European alliance for batteries, because I see it as a strategic commodity for the future. If we want to be world leader in car manufacturing, if we want to be the world leader in accommodating renewables in our system, we have to learn how to store the energy, and we have to have that ability and the technical skills to develop the batteries here in Europe. By 2025, we expect that there will be yearly demand for the batteries worth of 250 billion euros in Europe only. And I ask the car manufacturers, do we really want to ship all that money to China, Japan, and Korea? Shouldn't we invest in building these gigafactories here in Europe? Because we need it for the cars, we need it for the houses, we need it for the factories. We need this holy grail of renewables, not only to produce clean energy, but be able to store it and use it when we really need it. We are best in the world in integrating renewable energy in our energy system. Nobody does it better than Europeans, but of course the Chinese are catching up very, very quickly. They're a big market, they invest a lot of money in it, and therefore we need to be permanently better and better. And concerning the alternative fuels, when we talk about the infrastructure for alternative fuels, when you would see the table which we presented for acceleration of the completion of alternative fuel infrastructure in Europe, so we would see that there are several columns. There is, of course, electricity, there is hydrogen, there is CNG, compressed natural gas, there is LNG, which could be used for the ships, for example, and there are also possible new sources. So we are technologically neutral in this respect, and I expect that, for example, CNG or LNG would be used in the future, definitely for ships, but also for heavy-duty vehicles, especially in Nordic countries, when you have this long distance to cover, and when it's with that technological knowledge we have right now, difficult to foresee that they could be powered by electricity. So at the same time, we also have to kind of bear in mind that gas is very important transitional fuel. Why transitional? Because it's still fossil fuels. It's 50% less carbon intensive than coal, but still it's a fossil fuel, and I'm sure that we would use it for the decades to come, but in the end we will be for sure looking for alternatives. So therefore I think that we know how to use LNG, CNG, but we still have to learn how to use electricity and hydrogen for the mobility. Therefore maybe that focus is a little bit more on that technological development today.
A concluding question. We're out of time, but nevertheless I'll quickly ask it, and then you'll have a minute, a very quick possibility to answer that and conclude our conversation today. So, not on the energy side, but overall. I mean, you're sitting in Brussels, so you observe all of these processes like very closely. What is your assessment of the sort of state of health of European integration? I mean, we do hear a lot of things. I mean, a couple of years ago, we were quite apocalyptic with the Brexit and the wave of populism, it was called, and the rest of it. But nevertheless, there is a clear division line. You're a Central European, a Slovak representative yourself. There is this huge discussion about the Western camp and the Eastern, the Central camp, and all the problems with Poland and Hungary, and you know, I don't have to tell you. So, what is your assessment, very quickly?
I think that the quickest answer I can give you is the answer I was getting from different interlocutors in Davos, in the conference rooms, but also in the corridors. And the assessment they presented was that we are so happy that Europe is back, that you behave like responsible adult in this very complicated world, that you respect the rules, you are for free and fair trade, you are not forgetting about the developing countries, and that you manage to fight off all these anti-Europeans, neo-fascists, and different kind of anti-establishment parties. We know that that fight is not over yet, and I know that only chance for the Europe to continue to be a successful project is if we would have a support of the people. That's very clear, and I think it's task for all of us to explain it better and to explain it in more concrete terms. So I agree with you with the apocalyptic mood. 2 years ago, it was very difficult for us. It was not an easy job to be commissioner at that time. But now, as a personal impression, I can tell you that we breathe much more easily. We are growing economically faster than the United States. We gain a lot of respect in these international waters because they see that we are stable. We are, for outside world, with this idealistic, well-organized, cooperative group of the countries, try to talk to Latin Americans, Africans, or to any other region, and that we behave in this responsible way, and we are still strong as the economy, and I think we are the economy which is really in heavy process of the modernization and responding to the challenges of today, which probably the biggest one would be how to tackle the climate change. So I would say that it's much easier than it was before, but this is permanent, constant battle, and how to bring what is perceived sometimes as very distant, as very far away Brussels, to the local dimension, to the local politics, and to show that actually working together, it's much better than trying to do the same separately.
All right. Thank you very much. We're out of time, really, and I hope we didn't make you miss your airplane.
We have a meeting with the foreign minister, I think.
Oh, that can wait. Okay. Thank you very much for all the questions.